Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for attending our presentation today, 2016 Sales Tax Changes. We've got an excellent presentation scheduled up for you today. I'm just going to go ahead and give it another minute. We've got quite a few people streaming in, so I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to get settled. So I will be right back at you in just a minute. Hello everybody. Thanks so much for attending our webinar today, 2016 Sales Tax Changes Part 1. We've got an excellent presentation lined up for you today, even better presenter. We've got Shane Radigan, Sales Tax Compliance Expert, and he's going to go over a lot of the changes that may or may not be in store for 2016 at the federal and legislative level. Part 2, which will take place on December 17th, that's when we're going to go more in detail at the state-by-state changes. So I'm so glad that you're attending. Before I pass the mic over to Shane, I don't want to steal any of his thunder. I just wanted to go over a couple quick housekeeping items. A lot of people find that they prefer to listen to this presentation not through their computer speakers, and they get better sound quality through the phone. So if you look to your left-hand side of the console where it says Listen by Phone, just click down there, and it'll pop up a 1-888 number that you can call along with the conference room. Dial that, and you'll be able to listen in through your phone. Right below that, you can submit questions. Now, we have quite a few people registered for today's webinar. I think we're up at around 1,600. So we're probably going to get more questions than we are able to address during the webinar. I will answer the questions I can during this presentation. Otherwise, Shane will be able to address some of the questions at the end of the presentation, probably about 10 minutes before the top of the hour. But feel free to send them along, and if we're not able to get to them during the presentation, we can probably get right back to you with some assistance. Also, below that, you will see event resources. Now, if you would like to follow along with a PDF of the slides, by all means, just go ahead and click that, and you will see the slides so you can print them out. And we also have, exclusive just for the people who are attending this webinar, we have a report which goes over in detail much of what Shane is going to be talking about today, along with a full lineup of state-by-state changes. I believe it's about a 17-page report, a little more in-depth, and it has some funny little anecdotes as well. So I welcome you. Please go ahead and download and print that document out and forward it along. I think that about covers everything aside from one last thing. If you missed any part of today's webinar, by all means, you will automatically receive a recording, a link to the recording as early as tomorrow afternoon. So don't fear if you miss anything. You will get a chance to go back as often as you want to hear Shane's presentation. So I think that's enough of my talking. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Shane. Thanks, Shane. Thanks for joining us today, and take it away.
Thanks, Morgan. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all you guys taking the time to attend today. We'll talk about some proposed changes at the federal level. Some of it is kind of, if you attended this similar presentation a year ago, you might have heard a little bit about it. But then there's some different twists that have occurred. We'll also, some items I think that are more interesting because we really haven't had a chance to talk about them before, that we'll also touch on today is a potential action by the U.S. Supreme Court, or at least an indication that there might be. And we'll also look at a couple kind of interesting use cases, I think very interesting use cases for a tax geek, on where the states, how the states are approaching the current situation we have. And what is the situation that I'm talking about? Well, we had a great turnout today for a webinar titled Federal Sales Tax Legislation, and we all know there is no federal sales tax, right? So, what the purpose here today is, and we're really talking about is, what do we need to understand as business owners or as tax professionals, or if we're a tax professional providing services, what do we need to be able to tell our clients about, what 2016 might look like for them, and if the sands are about to shift under their feet for sales tax compliance or not, and if it does happen, what it might look like. So there's the introduction. Oh gosh, you guys have been staring at that page for too long. Yeah, I hope you got all that down. I am your presenter today. I do appreciate Avalara giving me the opportunity to do these sort of what I call thought leadership presentations. I think we have a fantastic product. I work every day hard to see that it's better and better and meets the needs of our customers. But I'm not here to talk all about the product today. I'm here to talk about sales tax, and I do appreciate Avalara giving me the opportunity to do this. So here we go. As Morgan pointed out, we decided this year to break this up into a couple presentations. The marketing people probably like it because they maybe can get a few more leads out of it. But hey, listen, part of the reason is, guys, and with all due respect to our marketing team, they do a fantastic job. That's what they're there for, right? But part of the reason, too, is given the climate in Washington, D.C., given the political emphasis, if you will, on sales tax collection, of course, I mean that in scale. There's a lot more important things going on in the world these days, but for tax pros, tax geeks, there's been a lot of chatter about sales tax compliance. You see it in op-ed pages. Particularly here this last week, we had Cyber Monday. In my poking around the internet, I see all kinds of articles and editorial pieces on, whether or not remote sellers ought to be obligated to collect, and more deeply, what tax they should be collecting. And it is remarkable and not unpredictable. It's a wonderful country we get a chance to live in, guys, to find out that there's a lot of different opinions on how this ought to go. But you can really kind of break them down into a couple camps, right, guys? There's one camp that really would love to see a more universal obligation to collect. In other words, basically businesses all over the country making sales, being obligated to collect tax on all those sales, at least the sales that consist of taxable items, right? And then there's a lot of folks that really kind of like things the way it is, they are, and those are the folks that would, at least I think from a legal kind of argument point of view, lean on the current Supreme Court jurisprudence. It's an awful word, but it does encapsulate what I'm trying to grab here, guys, and that is, hey, some folks think that quill is just fine, and a physical presence standard to obligate people to collect is the way it ought to go. The current setup prevents states from reaching across state lines and obligating remote businesses from following their rules. Well, I'm not here to talk about the politics of it today. We could have a whole lot of webinars on that. But I think I've learned that it's cool, it's important. I don't know how cool it is, but it's important to kind of lay that out because we'll talk about these proposals. This is what you came here for. And if you can appreciate kind of where the two sides conflict, you can really, I think, get a deeper understanding of why these things are the way they are. In other words, why has Congress chosen this manner on which to approach this? And that's what we're talking about first, guys, is congressional proposed action. And in order to explain what's happening in D.C., we'll take a look at three separate two proposed bills and one draft bill. And a couple of them are really similar, but I think it's a cool comparison to see how they differ. And the third of them, the Online Sales Simplification Act, is really different. And it's really important, I think, to take a look at that. So we'll talk about all those proposals. We'll look at some of the details. Hey, none of them are law yet, but the purpose today is not necessarily to understand every gritty detail of these proposed laws, but to understand the direction that this argument is moving in. And these proposals reveal that pretty well. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll talk some about some language that was published last summer in a Supreme Court case, in a decision, specifically by Justice Kennedy. And it's really interesting, and Justice Kennedy really thinks that we ought to make some changes in the way we collect sales tax in this country. So we'll take a look at that. Again, I'm not here to parse out a court decision or spend a lot of time, drilling the process and the procedure into your heads, and that's not what you came for. But I hope that when we're done, you can say, all right, I kind of understand that this could come from the Congress. In other words, we could see big alterations in the obligations we currently have, collection-wise, and that alteration, that sand shifting under our feet, the winds blowing that sand may come from the direction of the U.S. Congress. They may come from the U.S. Supreme Court. And finally, our third category is the states themselves. And the states have been huffing and puffing and trying to shift those sands from underneath your feet for years. And those of you that have been in the sales tax game for a while certainly can appreciate that, right? So nothing new that the states are interested in collecting more sales taxes, but we'll talk in a couple specific instances and more generally about some of the directions that the states are taking. Because in the meantime, while those of us who are tax pros or business owners trying to decide what's going to happen at a national level, the states have not ceased their efforts to find more taxpayers and to collect more revenue. So that's kind of a natural direction, right? So we'll talk about the states a little bit too. Any questions you got, pop them in there. Morgan will help us out at the end. This is strictly informative today, so I may get through it kind of quick. If we see that we got questions, maybe we'll spend a little more time on Q&A than usual. We usually try to shoot for 10 or 12 minutes at the end. Maybe we'll shorten up the prezo a little bit. It is really interesting stuff to me, and if you're in the catbird seat at some of these, or the hot seat, I should say, at the company, or you're advising your clients, there's a lot of sources of information out there, and it's hard sometimes to put it together. So hopefully this is an hour well spent. Okay, so let's talk about proposed action at the U.S. congressional level, and this is marketplace fairness, right, guys? If you know. Hell, sales tax shows up on the front pages of the Wall Street Journal every 3 or 4 months now in the last couple of years. This is usually why. This is the proposal that in 2013 actually passed the U.S. Senate. It never made it to a vote in the House. Currently, the bill is referred to the House Judiciary Committee based on its content, and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee really doesn't care for marketplace fairness, so there's a little bit of a logjam. Let's talk about what these things do and how they might affect your businesses or the clients you're talking to. So marketplace fairness is the one that has some momentum in the sense that a version of it, and I think the identical version, I'm not certain, I don't think there's any differences. I wouldn't swear to it, but I think it's exactly the same law that passed in 2013 in the Senate. So this thing came pretty close to becoming the new national standard. Let me regress just a little bit, or digress, whatever the word is I should use there, and say these rules at the congressional level all revolve around the concept of nexus. They all relate to the same components that you determine nexus based today. In other words, where am I obligated to collect? This is the question that we're asking, and all of these proposals seek to answer that question. They don't alter what is taxable. They don't, meaning these proposals, when I use the term they, these proposals do not alter what isn't taxable from state to state. These proposals do not carve out sales made over the internet versus sales made through other channels. It's not in there, even though almost every beat writer who's ever written a story about this proposed law, refers to it as an internet sales tax. There's nothing in it that limits it to sales made via the internet. Probably be an impossible thing to regulate anyways. This is about what sales is a vendor obligated to collect on. I think we all understand intuitively. We don't even really think about it. But the truth is, we have to analyze Nexus based on right the beginning of our business, right? And we take it for granted that we have Nexus, we have an obligation to collect in the states that our business exists in. And it's true, you do. You have a physical location. Maybe you don't rent a place, but you package up widgets in your garage and sell them over the internet. You do your banking in your home state. You're registered with your state for a business license. You might have a local business license. You might have filed income tax returns for several years. You've got Nexus in your home state. You're obligated to collect. Everybody just intuitively understands that. Concern that comes up, and what we're talking about today, guys, especially with these congressional proposals, is what about when I make a sale outside of the state that my company exists in? How do I determine, and what factors determine whether or not I'm obligated to collect on that? And I'll repeat this, guys, and I'll repeat it a few more times, and I apologize ahead of time. We are not talking about what is taxable and what is not. That still remains a state-by-state analysis. If you sell software, you have to determine if the software you sell is taxable in the state you live in, because you are obligated to collect tax on taxable sales in your state. When you make a sale of that software to the state next door, the first thing you have to do is analyze whether or not you have an obligation to follow the rules of that state at all. And that's the nexus analysis. That's what we're talking about. Are you obligated to collect? If you determine that you are obligated to collect, or you just would prefer to collect on behalf of your customers, then the determination is my software taxable in the state next door? And I'll probably mention that so you guys are sick of hearing it, even in this short presentation. But it's really important to remember not to mix up apples and oranges here. These proposals have to do with the obligation to collect, not what is or what isn't taxable. And I appreciate you giving me your patience and letting me go through that. I guarantee there's a few folks on that sales tax is not something that they got a ton of background in, and these types of distinctions I think are important for them to gain a deeper understanding. Okay, so marketplace fairness, what does it do? It really gives the many states a free ticket to obligate you or your clients to collect their sales tax on the sales made in their state. So marketplace fairness is based on this idea that a vendor well, let me use a hypothetical. If I'm a vendor of widgets up here in Edmonds, Washington, and I'm operating out of my garage, like my earlier mention, in my hypothetical, and I've got a laptop and I've got a website. And I saw a GoDaddy.com commercial on the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and I decided to go into business. I got a bank account, and I got a business license in the state of Washington. So everybody agrees that I got to follow the Washington rules. And my widgets are just plain old tangible widgets. They are taxable everywhere. They're just the most basic widget that man has ever conceived. So I know that my things under sales tax rules are the types of things that are taxable. The question is, when I make a sale outside of the state of Washington, am I obligated to collect? And in the current environment we live in, you got to do a nexus analysis. You got to say, all right, I'm in Washington and I made a sale to Boise, Idaho. Well, am I obligated to follow Idaho sales tax rules? Well, do I have a salesperson on the ground in Idaho? Do I have a physical plant in Idaho? Do I have click-through advertisements sitting on a website in Idaho? Yes, I will get to click-through advertising before we're done. And those are the kinds of things under current analysis you have to know to decide whether or not Idaho can reach out and force you to collect their tax via an assessment, right? A notice. Marketplace fairness and all these proposals in Congress seek to eliminate that kind of analysis, at least for most sellers. Marketplace fairness would allow the state of Idaho, through congressional action, to enforce its sales tax rules on my company in Edmonds, Washington, even though under a Quill Nexus standard, I don't have any particular contacts with Idaho. And that's what marketplace fairness is in a nutshell. What does it require of the states? Because it does require something of the states. Roughly speaking, guys, it requires some simplification processes on the part of the states. In other words, in order for a state to take advantage of this newfound marketplace fairness power, proposed power, the state is going to have to probably a better job than they already are of publishing rates. They're going to have to adopt the taxability matrix and publish it. They're going to have to set up an online filing portal reserved for remote sellers to make it real easy. How specifically these types of regulations might play out, I can't tell you, and I don't really want to even go down the road of trying to provide a hypothetical. But here's what I'll tell you. If you know anything about the Streamlined Sales Tax Initiative, and that's a voluntary organization of about 22, 23 states, about half the sales tax states, part of the Streamlined Sales Tax Initiative. In order to join this voluntary organization, the states have to simplify their processes for remote sellers. They have to do a better job of publishing rates. They have to be more transparent about taxability. They have to publish a matrix. Does this all sound familiar? And yes, it does. It sounds a lot like marketplace fairness. In fact, I think it's pretty fair to say, and this is just my opinion, but that the requirements that marketplace fairness sets out for the states, in order for them to take advantage of marketplace fairness, really mirror the requirements for membership in SST. They're very similar, at least. So if you want to see how this works, gain a better understanding of how streamlined sales tax works, and I think you're seeing a vision of what the drafters of marketplace fairness are probably thinking about. Let's talk about the nitty-gritty of the law, because that's what people always have questions about. I'm done the law professor bit for now. Marketplace fairness does provide a small seller exception, and this comes up a lot, right? This is a big concern, and you'll see when we talk about other versions of this and another version of this, you'll see that the drafters of the revised version, if you will, kind of softened this exemption a little bit. But what it is in the proposed law now, guys, is $1 million in remote sales. Now, remote sales are a defined term in this particular law. We're not talking about just gross sales. We're talking about sales made where no tax is collected based on lack of nexus. So let's go back to my hypothetical. And I don't think I'm oversimplifying this, guys. I think this is exactly how they intend it to work. This is the language in there. If I'm in Washington and I'm selling to Washington, well, obviously, as we've established, I'm collecting tax on those sales. They do not count towards the million. If I make sales to Idaho, like we talked about in my hypothetical, but maybe let's switch the hypothetical up. I have a salesperson in Boise. I'm collecting in Idaho. No problem. Those sales to Idaho, even though they're to another state, do not count towards the $1 million small seller exemption. If I make a sale to a customer in Georgia, where I have no nexus, no contacts, no obligation whatsoever to collect Georgia sales tax, that sale is a remote sale, and that sale counts towards the $1 million. So whatever that number is, guys, and this is probably a place where negotiations are hot and heavy. What is the small seller exemption? What's the number? The part of the deeper understanding of that is what constitutes that exemption, and it's currently, at least, this idea of remote sales. So it's not. It's a little disingenuous to say the law will apply to all businesses who make over $1 million in sales. The law will apply to all businesses who make over $1 million annually in remote sales. And remote sales, yes, I am an attorney, I apologize. Remote sales are not what they sound like. They are they're not necessarily a sale made across the state border. It's a sale that is made, or is a sale that is made without an obligation to collect, right? So a company like my little e-com company, If I'm selling to California and Idaho, I'm a West Coast company, and Nevada and Arizona, but I've got salespeople all over the West Coast. I'm already collecting there. And every once in a while I make a sale, on the east side of the country. It's only those remote sales that I need to look at to see if this rule would apply to me. Why am I going deep into this? Mostly because I get a ton of questions about this element of it. And but it's important because this is, is it going to be law is the first question. The next question is, does it apply to me or my clients? So I appreciate it. That's where the questions lie. Okay, let's look at another version of this. This is the Remote Transactions Parity Act. This is also a draft bill. This is drafted on the House side by a Republican, Representative Chaffetz from Utah. It's, in my view, kind of a marketplace fairness with some of the harder edges kind of shaved off a little bit, sanded off a little bit. Bottom line is it allows the states to require exactly the same thing. Your company, who is in another state, to collect their taxes. Fundamentally, this is exactly the same purpose. Fundamentally, RTPA asks the same types of simplification procedures or improvements from the states before the states can take advantage of it. RTPA does not affect taxability, does not affect rates. This is sounding a lot like marketplace fairness, right, guys? Well, this is how politics works, right? So let's talk about that small seller exemption. Well, for the Remote Transaction Parity Act, the small seller exemption is $10 million. And remember, we're talking about remote sales only. So that's a significant change, a significant number, and I don't have any numbers, guys, because nobody's ever kept track of remote sales before, as opposed to sales we made across the state border where we did collect tax. Nobody's keeping track of those statistics, so I don't know this, but I feel like that probably is a real meaningful jump in the exemption. It does phase the exemption out over time, so that by the time a decade or so is passed, the exemption will be to 1 million. And don't forget, guys, there's a lot of people in this argument who think there should be no exemption at all, right? So this is the political edge of this and how this is all taking place. And we can talk all day about that, and we talked about it a little, but mostly I want you guys to see what pieces are they touching? What is it that Congress is doing? In my view, they fundamentally are on the same page, these two proposals. They're just doing it ever so slightly different ways. RTPA provides this kind of strange exemption for catalog-only companies that don't have an internet presence. And if anybody is aware of one of these companies, I would love to know where they exist. So it's there. It's one of those things. It's quirky. I don't know who they have in mind, but I would think that some drafter somewhere has somebody in mind. It doesn't seem like a very meaningful exemption. Single collection, single registration, excuse me. So it's got this extra added quirk where it's demanding that the states come up with a universal registration form, I think in plain English. MTC has had one for years. Some of the states use it, some don't. I mean, this is not a new concept of simplification, but it is part of the RTPA. It does provide a little tiny bit of I don't know about tiny, but it gives a little audit relief, if you will, for smaller sellers, absent fraud or misrepresentation. This is only as meaningful as it applies to you, right? And how the states interpret it and whatnot. But it's in there, and I want you guys to see. This is the stuff that's getting kicked around, right? Politically wise, at least according to this article from the Hill, no, actually this is Salt Lake Tribune. Politically wise, according to the writers, there's some support for this on both sides of the aisle in the House, because this is generating in the House, right, guys? Marketplace fairness has started over in the Senate. Okay, so there's the outline of the two that have hit the news probably the most lately. Online Sales Simplification Act. You guys got to know this is out there, and it's a possibility. This was drafted and floated by Representative Goodlatte that I mentioned earlier, the Republican chair of the Judiciary Committee, who's not a big fan of marketplace fairness, or I think by extension the Remote Transactions Parity Act. Terrible acronyms, right? This is his version. Online Sales Tax Simplification Act really turns everything on its head. This is the origin solution that every once in a while you'll see mentioned in an article about this, or an op-ed. This is a solution that requires collection of taxes based on the location of the seller. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think that would be a boon for states like Oregon and Montana and Delaware and New Hampshire that don't have a state sales tax. I'm sure if the law were passed with only that element, the eastern side of Oregon would probably become one big Amazon warehouse. But the lawmakers who have drafted this have thought about that. This Online Sales Simplification Act provides for a pool, a national pooling of all this money that's collected, and then a redistribution to the states based on where the sales take place. Yeah, which sounds a lot like destination-based sourcing, but take it for what it's worth. It's possible. This is what happens in D.C., and this is the sort of thing where politics and the world we all on this call have to live in meet each other, and I hopefully you get a feel for that, of what's going on in the U.S. Congress. There's some links on all those. I apologize, those links are all a month or two old. I kind of watch the news for it. I haven't seen anything of any meaningfulness in that time. That's why they're still there. So check it out. So we've talked about congressional action, potential congressional action. This is what your clients, your founders, your CFOs, your biz dev people. This is what they're asking about, because this is what they're reading about in the papers and stuff. What's going to happen with this, and hopefully you got a little background there, at least a cocktail party level of understanding of what's going on, so you can be comfortable with it. Let's talk about the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'll do my darndest here to keep this from getting too sleep-inducing, right? But this is interesting to those of us that follow this stuff. The Supreme Court did render a decision on a case that related to a sales tax regulation from Colorado, which we're not talking about, because the court decided the case on a totally different basis. It was about whether a case belonged in federal or state court. That's what the U.S. Supreme Court decided. And they were unanimous. It was really an easy case for them. However, Justice Kennedy, who was wrote in the decision, it was unanimous, so I guess they all were on one decision, on one side of it. He took the opportunity to really lambaste Quill. In other words, Justice Kennedy took the opportunity to say, hey, this case is about sales tax. We decided it on a totally different basis, and that's why it was here. It wasn't here for us to decide the sales tax question. But since I have everybody's attention regarding sales tax, let me tell you what I think about what's going on. And Justice Kennedy took the opportunity in the published decision to express his belief that Quill is outdated, that a physical presence standard for nexus is ridiculous. I don't know if he used that word, but you got the implication from the decision, that in an environment where the web is so ubiquitous, and a retailer, even like my little hypothetical widget e-com company here in Edmonds, I can make sales to all over the country now, right? I don't need a back office. I don't need a warehouse. I can do drop shipping. I can have Amazon fulfill my orders. Kennedy's getting at something I think we all kind of understand, is that a physical presence standard, like it or not, is less meaningful, a lot less meaningful as time goes on, in terms of whether or not a business is availing itself to the benefit of another state's market, right? When you get down to the due process question, at what point can a state, under constitutional principles, demand that my company collect their taxes? I mean, that's what we're talking about. And Justice Kennedy is saying that the current standard, the current environment we're living in, which began as the Quill decision, it's outdated. Here's an super interesting fact to me. Justice Kennedy was on the majority that decided Quill in 1992. So Justice Kennedy is the fellow that 23 years ago agreed with a decision that set up the current environment we have, which he has now taken the opportunity to express his pretty serious displeasure with it. And finally, and for those of you that follow the court at all, or kind of understand how this process works, he made a proactive offer to the legal community to find a case that could get to the court, that had the right facts and circumstances, so that the court would have an opportunity to undo Quill. And why is this important? It's just an old justice rattling off on a non-binding decision. maybe that's true, but it may also indicate that Kennedy may have some allies on the court, or else he might not have made such a provocative statement, frankly, for a justice. And we may see changes for you guys on the call. After all that, why are you telling me this, Shane? We may see changes come through from the Supreme Court. We may have a decision, much like Quill did in 1992, that resets the standard for collection in other states. And if that's the case, then Congress won't need to ever do anything. They can undo what the court does, or they can add to it, or they can do nothing, but it may be the court that actually alters fundamentally the environment we're living in. And that's the takeaway today. So now, when you're at that cocktail party, you want to really blow their minds. You bust this out on them after you just told them about the marketplace fairness from top to bottom. But it's true. I mean, I'm joking, but it is really true, guys. That you never know. This could come from the court in a year or two, and we may be talking about a whole new case. And I may be doing webinars I'm not doing webinars on Nexus based on Quill principles anymore, right? Hey, I mentioned this a few times. It's super important takeaway, guys. And this is the apples and oranges thing that I mentioned earlier. None of these proposals, and what Justice Kennedy is talking about, none of it has anything to do with whether or not State A taxes widgets or State B exempts widgets. States still will have the ability to create their own regulations, their own favored products or services, their own disfavored products or services, their own rules and regulations, their own exemptions, like we've got now, right, guys? And for those of you who've done this for a while, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And none of that's going to change, and just keep that in mind. All the complexities that exist outside of the question about obligation to collect will continue to exist. So, this is a potential sand-shifting moment, but we're still, in the end, at the same beach, right? We're still sitting at the same ocean. So now we're switching gears again. We're to part 3 of this presentation. You guys have been patient, and I see you got a lot of good questions. So we'll get through this quick enough, and we'll have some time for some questions. So what's happening? Hey, watch. For those of you that are advising clients, particularly, or those of you that are burdened with sales tax compliance, maybe on a multi-state basis, you probably already know this, but you need to watch some of these states that are really at the leadership helm of how are they going about working around the current rules, right, guys? Because we're done talking about proposed rules now, right, guys? We're not talking about marketplace fairness, and we're not talking about Justice Kennedy's fantasy of overturning Quill. We're talking about what's happening right now. This is 2016, almost 2015, and what are the states doing around this issue of obligation to collect? You got to watch for these states that are at this leadership position. New York State has been, for the last decade, been a source of a couple really interesting concepts and ideas around Nexus that have found support in the courts and, frankly, have spread or are spreading amongst the several states. So keep in mind that even though you may not be operating in some of these bigger kind of policy driving states, often they're the ones to keep an eye on. New York at the current time, if we're talking about obligation to collect, and Nexus is certainly one of them. I mentioned click-through Nexus. This is not brand new in New York. It's becoming brand new everywhere else. So about 10 years ago or so, New York, some smart New York regulators and attorneys decided that they were going to find a way to obligate certain companies that were selling lots of stuff into New York but not paying New York taxes, and they decided the way to do it was to work through this obligation to collect and find a way to kind of push and pull and stretch the Quill decision to somehow capture transactions made over the internet. And they came up with a click-through Nexus approach. And it's interesting. It's, in a nutshell, guys, it's if I'm my e-com company in Edmonds, and I sell widgets, and I got a customer, all right, I read a blog on widgets that's from Missouri. It's just some nutcase who got a blog started about widgets. because that's how it goes usually. And this person just loves widgets, and they're getting 2,000 or 3,000 hits a day of people who like to read about widgets. And I think, hey, those are my customers, right? So I go to the web host, guy who owns the website, girl, and I say, hey, I'll put an ad on your website, please. I don't have any money because I'm just a little e-com guy working out of my garage, but I'll tell you what. Every time I sell a $5 widget, I'll give you $1. You know, I can tell what sales come through your website. The website guy says, yeah, I already pay for the website, right? The real estate is free. You guys have been on blogs before where there's 37 ads and one 2-paragraph blog post, right? You can put as many of these things on a web page as you want. So the webmaster, the guy who owns the website says, yeah, why not? Good, cool, great. Sell some widgets. What this Click-through Nexus says, in this case it would be the state of Missouri, they don't have Click-through Nexus. It's probably not a good example, but I just wanted to get you guys at least at the hypothetical stage. But if Missouri had Click-through Nexus, Missouri would say it's the placement of that ad combined with the underlying referral agreement, where money is actually changing hands based on sales made through the site. That is a physical presence under Click-through Nexus principles, and thereby I am obligated to collect under my hypothetical, forgive me, Missouri. The law we were talking about is New York, and that's what I should have used for my hypothetical. So, hey, substitute New York, right? But I hope you get the concept, and that is states that are adopting this click-through nexus, if you are doing that kind of advertising, or your clients are doing it, you very well might be inadvertently obligating them to collect tax in those states. In fact, there's a certain company over here in Seattle, slowly but surely, devouring South Lake Union in Seattle, called Amazon. And Amazon, as we know, has been at times aggressive or at times compliant, but has always been at the forefront of this argument, if you will, or this policy issue about tax collection. Those states there, you see that the little snippet from their current affiliate advertising. Because what I just described for Click-Through Nexus, by the way, you guys, that it was Amazon that they called it affiliate advertising. They had it before anybody else. That was probably who New York had in mind. Now, if you are operating a website in those states, Amazon will discontinue their affiliate advertising. They do discontinue their affiliate advertising agreement with you immediately. They use the phrase, once you become a resident of the state. And that's exactly what they're getting at, guys. So Arkansas, Colorado, Maine, there is Missouri. I guess Missouri does have Click-Through Nexus. So cancel everything else I said earlier, right, guys? It's spreading fast. We're going to look at some that are coming on right now. So, hey, for those of you that aren't doing this kind of advertising, you got nothing to worry about. For those of you that are, or you got some aggressive marketing types, we won't use any names, that are out there doing this sort of thing, you may be establishing nexus here and there without knowing it. And the ones that are changing, oh goodness, we missed the slide. Shoot. But I know them by heart, guys. Washington just instituted click-through. Michigan definitely did, and Nevada did as well. The list of states now is up to like 14 or 15. And really, this is all a result of the success New York had. And slowly but surely, these states picked right up on it. So, hey, so there's a couple cool concepts by the states. Alabama's got this simplified sales tax portal for folks that are not conceding nexus in Alabama but want to collect voluntarily. Again, it looks like something that's kind of a precursor to some kind of marketplace fairness type of simplification requirement of the state. So that's kind of interesting too. But we got like 15 minutes, and I see some good questions. So honestly, I'd like to just switch over to questions. Maureen, you want to help me get through some of them? I bet we could do just as good for the last 15 minutes or so doing questions as we could any more of this stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, well,
again. Oh yeah, and again for everybody on the line today, we are going to have a presentation on the 17th with Shane, and he's going to go over more in depth of what's going on at the state level, state by state. So there's some interesting developments there. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of these questions. We got a lot of detailed questions, and I'll apologize, Shane, if you might have to reiterate a couple things. But one person asked. Is the $1 million annual remote sales a total is that for all states? And I think that goes back to the Marketplace Fairness Act.
That's right. And
what would be stipulated there. Is it different in North Dakota than it would be in Washington, or is it just across the board?
According to the Marketplace Fairness and the Remote Transactions Parity Act, which is a $10 million exemption, but the $1 million exemption in Marketplace Fairness is aggregate. There are a lot of questions people have about how prospectively do we know what our sales are going to be for the year? What if our sales go up or down, above the threshold or below? How does that obligation change? And frankly, I don't have those specific answers yet. I don't think anybody does until we see this in action. But the bottom line is, though, to answer that question, I can't answer that question. It's in the aggregate. So if I'm up here in Edmonds and I'm making these remote sales, like I mentioned in my hypo, the only places I have nexus are in Idaho and Washington. Every other sale I make, I'm not collecting and I'm not dealing with sales tax because I don't have any obligation to under the current rules. So it would be the other 48, it wouldn't be the 48 states, it would be the other states that have a sales tax. And aggregate those sales together to come up with $1 million. Once I hit $1 million of those sales to other states that have a tax, under the proposal here, then I'm caught in the net, if you will understand that analogy. Hey, well, you're scrolling. I do see one that's really quick and easy. So you find us another juicy one, Morgan. But I got one I can answer really quick here.
Hey, you go for it.
Someone asked, "What is quill?" And forgive me, I should have gone a little deeper into that. Quill is a shorthand for a Supreme Court case that was decided in 1992, and one of the participants, one of the litigants, was the Quill Company. And if you're in the office supply realm at all, particularly a couple decades ago, every 2 or 3 months you'd get a Quill catalog in the mail, and I think you still do. Probably you get more of a virtual catalog now, but you used to get a catalog in the mail, and Quill was essentially a mail order office supply place. So that's how they ended up in this mess. You can understand they're a natural kind of company that wants to understand their obligations. It ended up being the state of South Dakota, of all states, but that was the case that ended up to the Supreme Court. And the question was, in this particular instance, Quill had, at that time, based on the facts and circumstances, they had no connections with South Dakota, meaning they had no physical location. They did not have salespeople there. They didn't store any products there. They didn't have displays. They didn't do any banking. They didn't register for business, right? You getting the drift here, right? The only connection Quill had with South Dakota under the facts of the case was they sent catalogs in by mail, they accepted orders over the phone or via mail, and then they sent stuff into South Dakota via the mail or via a third carrier partner. They weren't even doing their own deliveries. So they never stepped foot in South Dakota. And the question of the court was, can South Dakota obligate Quill to collect sales tax on all the sales that Quill was making into South Dakota? And the court said no. And the court in that case, knowingly or unknowingly, set the stage for what has become the next almost 24 years of hair pulling by those of us who have to try to figure this standard out. And they created a standard called a physical presence standard. And the court said unless a company has a physical presence within a state, the state cannot obligate them to collect their taxes. But of course, what has happened in the last 24 years? We have a lot of new and interesting ways to define physical presence, including click-through nexus, right? A web page advertisement has been deemed a physical presence under the Quill standard. So that's what Quill is, guys, and I apologize for giving that short shrift. That is the latest case, though, and that is the basis for all these rules about obligation to collect that currently exist. You got anything else, Morgan? You got a good one?
Yeah, I sure do. One person, and this is for everyone here. One person asked again about that the report that we created at the beginning of the presentation. Just to reiterate, if you look over under Event Resources, click on that tab, and the slide deck from today, as well as that report, should appear. If you have any trouble, just go ahead and let me know, and I can possibly just email it to you directly. But here's another question that came in, and I think for one of the few times, Shane, I almost feel confident that I can answer it. So I'm glad that I have you on the line too. But
you've listened through enough of these, Morgan. You must be getting good at it by now, buddy.
Yeah, I think sales tax expert by accident. One person asked, if I have a 1099 contractor acting as a sales agent in Illinois, but my business is in North Carolina, do I have Nexus in Illinois? I would vote yes. Does a 1099 contractor count as...
You would win the prize, Morgan. You got 100 points, man. I hope that was your double Jeopardy or final Jeopardy question, because you got it all. That is correct, yeah. A 1099 contractor is a classic case of a physical presence as deemed by the courts, right, guys? We're not going to get into, hey, what's physical about it? But the fact is that is well established across all the states, that as soon as you've got anybody working for you inside of a state, so it could be an employee, could be a contractor like this, a 1099. There's a case in Kansas from a few years back where I don't know the family connections, but I just imagine basically there's an old guy, like an uncle. I imagine some uncle, kind of doing some marketing on behalf of a nephew or a niece's company from outside of Kansas. He wasn't getting paid. In fact, they really weren't even covering his expenses, if I remember the facts and circumstances. It was like a retiree, and somebody was selling widgets, and he was going around to hardware stores and saying, look at my niece's widgets. That was roughly the facts and circumstances of the case. But the courts in Kansas said, yep, that's Nexus. He's here, and he's working on behalf of the company. We don't care if he's not getting paid. We don't care if he's not on commission. Yeah, one area, and you're right, one area where you can have a lot of confidence, Morgan, about Nexus is as soon as you have boots on the ground. Installation teams, deliveries with your own vehicle, even attending trade shows can trigger Nexus of varying degrees. The states vary, guys. You know that. But there are some places where attendance at a trade show, depending on the types of activities you perform there or how long the trade show is, trigger Nexus. That means you owe sales tax on all your, or you need to collect sales tax on all the sales you make from that moment forward, right? Nexus is not a 50-50 proposition. So yeah, 1099 definitely, and really any time you got boots on the ground at all, you got to be concerned about the potential for. Now there's a practicality element here too, right, guys? I mean, if you got people, landing in town at an airport and they get on the phone and call a customer. In the 2 hours they're sitting in the hotel bar or the airport bar between, planes, they probably have done some business there. I don't know if I would run to the state and say I'm ready to register for sales tax. That's your decision. But there's a sliding scale here, guys, and pretty soon, doesn't take long. As soon as you got anybody in a state, yeah, you got an obligation there.
Okay. Here's another question that it goes back to the Marketplace Fairness Act of 2015, but I think it probably speaks, overall to what's in TAC today. But somebody asked, are sales to out-of-state retailers included in the total remote sales under MFA of 215? The business in question sells both to out-of-state retailers and online direct sales. Is it all included?
Well, the language, so I would say no, because we're talking about sales for resale, right, Morgan? Mm-hmm. Yeah, to a distributor. So those are exempted under state rules. So again, the fine details of this remain to be seen, but my interpretation of it is that what consists the $1 million are only those sales that would otherwise be taxable, but for the fact that a vendor lacks Nexus. So my opinion on this, and I have been asked this before, and I will tell you guys, I could be wrong, because we're looking at a piece of legislation that has not been, first of all, turned into law, but we don't really have any regulations or history to understand how the details are going to work. But my interpretation of it is that exempt sales for a legitimate basis exemption, meaning a resale being the most common, would not be included in the $1 million threshold for collection obligation purposes. And that's the best I can do, guys. But the language refers to sales that are made where no tax is collected but for the effect of the Marketplace Fairness Act itself. So it uses kind of circular language. So I'm even doing some interpreting myself when I share with you guys what I think about it. There are no deep publications or analysis yet. I mean, that just doesn't happen with proposed laws, and in some ways that's on purpose, right? The drafters of these bills would prefer to get them turned into law before they turn into public commentary. So anyhow, I think that's my answer to your question with that caveat. It's a great question.
Okay. Here's another question, and there's a quick way to answer it, and I think that there's probably even a broader way to kind of address really how to tackle it. But somebody just asked, do you have a Nexus worksheet? Knowing that the states vary so much, how would you respond to that?
Oh, well, I would say that for anyone that is charged with either helping a client determine Nexus or analyze their own company's Nexus, you need to start out with some sort of checklist form. And and I have one, and I'll share it. Morgan, if you can push it out, I'm glad to share it. It's just a checklist, and I positioned this checklist at the time, guys. It was meant for professionals like CPAs, and the idea was these are the questions to ask your customers or your clients. All of these may not matter in every state you're in, but you need to have an understanding of all of these types of activities in any given state, so that then you can, yourself, the person who's on the hook for this answer, can take those answers and then go look specifically at a given state. Listen, the Nexus standards don't change much from state to state. This is really an analysis of, do we have enough contacts in a given state? In other words, it's not, North Carolina has different Nexus rules than New York. Well, they kind of do, but in the end, they're all cabined by these Supreme Court rulings. They're all very similar. So the question isn't, when I say look at the states, it isn't look at the state's rules, it's break out the activities per state, right? Sometimes, guys, this is a holistic analysis, not an individual analysis. In other words, having a display case in a state might be a Nexus triggering activity. But if you don't have any other activity in that state, you got to make a risk analysis. You got to decide, maybe I can just go get the darn display and we don't have to worry about it. And I'm not advising anybody to do that, but my point is, when I say get a checklist and analyze state by state, it's not a matter of looking at state rules. It's, does the activity in a given state rise to the level that we got an obligation? And if you got an employee there, like that earlier question, you don't even have to go any further. Some things are slam dunk Nexus, if you will. But sometimes it's kind of an analysis. Like, well, we attended a trade show last year, and we had a contractor that worked for us a couple years ago when we were a different entity, and we merged. And right, there's all kinds of little facts and circumstances. But until you get a handle on those activities, you're just poking around in the wind, in the smoke. So, Morgan, I'll get you that if you can push it out. I'm more than happy to share it with everybody.
Oh, absolutely. What I can do is everyone who registered and or attended will automatically receive a link to the recording of this. And so along with that email, Shane, I can just go ahead and make sure that everybody gets that document. That'd be great.
Cool. I'm happy to share it with you guys. It's a good starter. Listen, it's as you can tell, marketplace fairness freaks a lot of business people out, because they view it as, obviously, an expanded obligation, a reduced competitive advantage. But on the other hand, for tax pros, and people have, one of these proposals would bring some regularity to this type of analysis, right? Because that form I send you with about 60 different boxes to check, that's just part of it, right? It is difficult, very legalistic analysis under current rules to decide where you need to collect and where you don't at the fringes. And these proposals would eliminate a lot of that analysis. I mean, we'll have a lot of other things to do and worry about, right? It's not like our lives are going to get much easier, but you can see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, even if one of these things passes, and as long as it's regulated and enforced fairly, it could in the end be something that makes everybody's life a little easier, believe it or not. So anyhow, I'll send that out to Morgan, and he'll push it out to you guys. No worries.
Okay, great. Another person asked if anything is enacted in Pennsylvania and or Illinois over the next week or two will it be incorporated into the webcast that's going to take place this month on the 17th. So I think the short answer to that is and Shane, chime in. If something really major happens at any of the state levels, we can try before then to get that into the presentation. But do you foresee anything really on the hinges right now that could take place, in the next week or two?
Well, believe it or not, we've got a question from someone who's paying attention a little bit, Morgan. And yes, by the way, if anything late-breaking happens, man, we'll try to share with you. Pennsylvania particularly, I don't know, I haven't been following Illinois that closely, but definitely in Pennsylvania, sales tax is a huge issue in the budget negotiations this year, Morgan. I mean, like you hardly ever see at the state level. The governor has proposed major alterations, not just in rates, but in what is taxable and what isn't, and really could be some radical changes in PA, and they have been dithering around down there. It seems like a year. It's been a while. So, yes, I can tell you we are diligent because that's our job, right? We got to pay attention on the content side here, and I keep my eyes open for interesting or important changes to add to these types of presentations. And on top of that, I can tell you we're all watching Pennsylvania and hoping they don't pass this thing on, December 27th or something. But there's not a whole lot we can do about it,
Yeah.
So we are keeping an eye, and we'll try to include anything because it's it is the end of the year and you never know. Although for the most part, guys, you're not going to see a lot of changes that pop up, except for really. Occasionally hostile, but definitely mixed up political environments like you have in Harrisburg right now. So, great question. We'll do our best.
Excellent. That puts us at the top of the hour. I just wanted to take a quick moment here just to mention something new here with Avalara. We have a guaranteed accurate, and it's for as long as you are a customer of Avalara AvaTax. If you ever suffer a negative audit finding and financial loss related to an inaccurate result, as a result of the Avalara service, we pay for the uncollected tax, penalty, and interest and refund. So, it's a big vote of confidence in the accuracy of what we provide. So, a lot of what Shane talked about here, to kind of put it in perspective of what Avalara provides, is we automate the process. There's over, I believe, the last figure was 12,000 tax jurisdictions across the U.S. And there's a manual way to do it, and there's a way to automate the process and be accurate. And on top of that, we have people such as Shane Radigan here who help businesses figure out what their nexus liabilities are and help counsel them through that to stay compliant. So I welcome anybody. Please do contact us. We even have a free trial offer, and we'd love to show it to you. So I think without further ado, I hope to see many of you back on the 17th for part 2 with Shane. And for everybody who did contact me to get a direct email for that sales tax report, I will send it over to you shortly. So without further ado, thanks a lot, Shane.
Thank you, Morgan. Just one more time, guys. Thanks for spending an hour with us. We'd really appreciate it. Have a great afternoon.